Day, the Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriations, and Housing is now called to order. Today is Monday, October 11th, 2021. The time is 3:30 p.m. Welcome everyone connected by Zoom and those tuning in via television or the YouTube channel. Thank you all for your patience and for accommodating this Zoom platform while we maintain social distancing mandates. Notices for this public hearing were disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets on Monday, October 4th, 2021, 5 working days prior, and again on Thursday, October 7th, 2021. The following item will be heard this afternoon during this afternoon's virtual public hearing. Bill number 206-36 LS, introduced by Senators Mary Camacho Torres, Telena Cruz Nelson, Jose Pedo Terlaje, Amanda L. Shelton, Tina Rose Muña Barnes, James C. Moylan, Clynton E. Ridgell, Joe S. San Agustin, V. Anthony Ada, and Frank Blas Jr. An act to require the promulgation and publication of interim rules for all child placement agencies by the Department of Public Health and Social Services, and to ensure transparency, permit public participation, and provide a method of making such rules readily accessible to the public, and to further appropriate $1,000 from the unexpended funds of the Office of Senator Mary Camacho Torres of LIHESLATURAN GUÅHAN to the Department of Public Health and Social Services for this purpose. General rules of conduct. This Zoom meeting is hosted by my staff and will mute all Zoom participants until called upon by me. Members of the committee and or non-committee members will be allowed to pose a question to an individual testifying. Individuals testifying shall first be recognized by me before speaking and begin by stating their name for record-keeping purposes. When called to speak, please ensure that you are unmuted. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inferences to the character or motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. Any violations of this general rule of conduct will result in removal from the virtual public hearing. Please ensure that your video remains on throughout the hearing. Participants must be visible at all times and not engaged in any other activity during the hearing. Failure to maintain visibility may cause your removal from the meeting during the live stream. Now I'd like to thank and acknowledge my colleagues for attending this afternoon's hearing, beginning with Senator Mary Torres, Senator Amanda Shelton, Senator Tello Taidagui, and Senator Joanne Brown. Thank you for attending this afternoon. And at this time, I will recognize the primary sponsor of the legislation to provide an opening statement. Senator Mary Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill number 206-36 LS is an act to require the promulgation and publication of interim rules for all child placement agencies by the Department of Public Health and Social Services, and to ensure transparency, permit public participation, and provide a method of making such rules readily accessible to the public, and to further appropriate $1,000 from the unexpended funds of my office to the Department of Public Health and Social Services for this purpose. In short, Mr. Chair, Bill 206 would establish a fair and transparent rulemaking process for the licensing of child placement agencies. I want to be clear that there are already adoption policies and procedures that any agency advocating for adoption in Guam must follow. Specifically, these policies and procedures are found under 19 GCA Chapter 4 and 13 and in Title 26 of the GAR. For example, all adoptive families must undergo an extensive screening process by the courts of Guam, evaluating their lifestyle, their personal history, their financial situation, the motivation for adoption, any personal and professional references, and of course, criminal background checks. The families must also undergo a physical home evaluation and remain supervised by public health for up to a year. Bill 206 says that if we're going to create requirements for agencies that are simply assisting and advocating for these families, then we should do it the right way. The first and perhaps most important part of that, Mr. Chair, is to ensure transparency. That is why Bill 206 requires public health to promulgate and publish interim rules, setting minimum standards for the licensing of all child placement agencies. These rules must then receive a public hearing and legislative approval to become effective. Mr. Chair, I recognize that the administrative adjudication law can be lengthy and cumbersome, so cumbersome that some government agencies have been operating off of draft rules for decades. That's why it's so important that if a waiver of the law is made, that we do not marginalize the general public from this process. Bill 206 would allow public review and permit input from relevant stakeholders to ensure that the interim rules are pertinent to the needs of the community. This is simply the consistent thing to do, because if no bill can become law without a public hearing, Mr. Chair, then why should it be any different for rules and regulations, especially if those rules are supposed to protect our most vulnerable children? The second thing this bill does is it mandates that the rules apply to all child placement agencies, not just adoption agencies. As we know, Guam continues to experience large numbers of children entering our welfare system at a rate far greater than those that are being adopted. Again, I believe in the men and women of CPS and the current protections we have for foster care and adoptions. But if others want even clearer regulations for agencies that help facilitate this process, then let's make it fair. As a result, Bill 206 requires that any individual or organization that places, plans for, or assists in the placement of an unrelated minor must be licensed. This broader language falls in line with other jurisdictions that require licensing for child placement. I do want to emphasize that under this language, this provision would only apply to those entities that place children, not those that shelter them, as childcare facilities or group care shelters are already licensed under Title 26, Chapter 1 of the GAR. I am also more than happy to work with public health to expand this language or provide flexibility where they deem necessary. And finally, Mr. Chair, Bill 206 recognizes that if we are to create an exception to those administrative adjudication law while balancing the need for transparency, we must also clearly define the method by which such hearings shall be funded. That's why an appropriation was inserted into this bill with $1,000 from my office budget to assist public health in the publication of these rules, such as the costs associated with printing and the public notice. In closing, Mr. Chair, I just want to recognize our non-government partners and volunteers who work night and day to find safe and loving homes for each of Guam's children. The Bureau of Social Services is one agency, but it requires many dedicated entities, nonprofits, and individuals in our community working together to protect our children and strengthen our Guam families. The time and care that you give this community deserves public recognition and great appreciation. And it is my hope that in providing a fair and transparent rulemaking process, Bill 206 helps you as much as the department. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Torres. And now we will begin with hearing a presentation of testimony, beginning with Mrs. Melanie Brennan, CPS.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Senator Clynton. Thank you for the opportunity to come before the esteemed Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriations, and Housing to extend my support of Bill 206-36 LS, introduced by the Honorable Mary Camacho Torres and co-sponsored by Senators Telena Nelson, Jose Terlaje, Amanda Shelton, Vice Speaker Tina Rose Muña Barnes, James Moylan, yourself, Joseph Agustin, Anthony Ada, and Frank Blas Jr. Bill 206-36 is an act to require the promulgation and publication of interim rules for all child placement agencies by the Department of Public Health and Social Services, and to ensure transparency, permit public participation, and provide a method of making such rules readily acceptable to the public, and to further appropriate $1,000 from the unexpended funds of the Office of Senator Mary Torres, to the Department of Public Health and Social Services for this purpose. The Department of Youth Affairs has been working with Child Protective Services since late January of this year due to Executive Order 2021-02, signed by the administration, declaring a state of emergency within the Bureau of Social Services Child Protective Services, or CPS. In addition to addressing the backlog of referrals, we also provide temporary but much needed manpower assistance. We identify measures to improve efficiencies, implement changes to the overwhelmed child welfare system, and make direct recommendations to this administration for system improvement and sustainability. Additionally, a team of Bureau retirees voluntarily provide their time and expertise to assist with this emergency declaration. They have been invaluable to the progress already made at the Bureau of Social Services Administration, or BASA. The Home Evaluation and Placement Services section, or HEPS, is comprised of the Adoption and Custody Unit, as well as the Licensing and Certification Unit for Child Care Facilities and Family Foster Homes. They're responsible for conducting comprehensive social studies and adoption custody reports ordered by the Superior Court of Guam. This section is already involved in technical assistance support from capacity building, Center for States, or Region 9, relative to the development of Guam Adoption Agency licensure requirements. Currently, there are only 5 staff in this section: a social services supervisor 1, 3 social worker 3s, and 1 acting program administrator 4, who serves as the social services licensing officer responsible for the licensing of all child care facilities on Guam. Bill 20636 LS, if enacted, will mandate that any licensure rules developed by the Department of Public Health and Social Services undergo a public hearing and legislative approval, which aligns with open government. Stakeholder input is critical to the creation of sustainable high standards, rules, and regulations developed to protect the children and families we serve. I support and commend the author and co-sponsors of Bill 20636. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Brennan. Next is Mr. Terry Uggan, Department of Public Health and Social Services.
Thank you. Buenas and half a day, Senator Joe S. and Agustin, Chairman for the Committee on General Government, Operations, Appropriations, and Housing. Senator Mary Camacho Torres, Telena Cruz Nelson, Jose Terlaje, Amanda L. Shelton, Tina Muña Barnes, James C. Moylan, Senator Clynton E. Ridgell, E.V. Anthony Ada, and Frank F. Blas Jr. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this virtual public hearing and the opportunity to provide my testimony regarding Bill number 206-36 LS, an act to require the promulgation and publication of interim rules for all child placement agencies by the Department of Public Health and Social Services, and to ensure transparency, permit public participation, and provide a method of making such rules readily accessible to the public, and to further appropriate $1,000 from the expended funds of the Office of Senator Mary Camacho Torres of LIHESLATURAN, GUÅHAN, to the Department of Public Health and Social Services for this purpose. My name is Terry G. Uggan, Deputy Director of the Department of Public Health and Social Services, overseeing the Division of Public Welfare and the Division of Senior Citizens, and in support of the department's efforts to mitigate the COVID-19 pandemic. We are proud to be a highly diverse community. We celebrate the preservation of our culture and language for future generations. Our future is in the hands of Guam's children. The need to protect our children is the responsibility of our community, policymakers, and most importantly, our families. However, in the absence of parents or extended family, it is our community, with the support of policymakers, role to protect the well-being of our children. The placement of an infant, child, or youth in an adoption, loving, and nurturing home is critical to the development of a child's health and social well-being. Developing and implement rules and regulations needed to safeguard these values is critical. And
Mr. Uggan?
Yes,
Mr. Uggan, if I may, could you just speak a little louder? There's some requests from some in attendance. If you could speak up a little bit louder, or maybe a little closer to the microphone.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
The placement of an infant, child, or youth in an adoptive, loving, and nurturing home is critical to the development of a child's health and social well-being. Developing and implementing rules and regulations needed to safeguard these values is critical and must be in place in order to have the best partnership outcomes when licensing independent adoption agencies. The Bureau of Social Services Administration, also known as BOSS's Home Evaluation and Placement Service Section Unit, is in partnership with Region 9 Capacity Building Centers for states and territories. This federal agency's purpose is to enhance, expand, and develop services, practices, and policies for children and child welfare agencies to improve outcomes for children and families. Although BOSSA has been receiving technical assistance and training from the Capacity Building Center for States for the past 4 years, they are now providing technical assistance relative to the licensing of adoption agencies. With their guidance and community input, the Department of Public Health and Social Services will move forward with the development of the rules and regulations that will define the process for an adoption agency to be established on Guam. Bill number 206-36 LS allows for the Department of Public Health and Social Services interim rules to remain in place for a period of 1 year or until the promulgation and rules pursuant to the Administrative Adjudicative Act, whichever comes first. The provision that requires the promulgation and publication of these interim rules and regulations aligns with the concept with the Open Government Law 5 GCA Government Operations Chapter 8 Open Government Law. In addition, Bill number 206-36 LS also provides $1,000 to help the Department of Public Health and Social Services prepare for publish these rules, which will help pay for ads in newspapers to inform the community and request for stakeholders' input to cover expenses for the rules to be published in newspapers and at the mayor's offices for community review. This measure will ensure transparency and public participation by allowing rules and regulations to be accessible to the public for review, comment, and recommendation. This approach will allow for community input and will instill public confidence in the Guam adoption process. Therefore, the Department of Public Health is in favor of Bill number 206-36 LS for the clarity, a minimum of 1 year to put forth the final rules and regulations, and most importantly, it's adjunct with the open government law. Thank you very much for your time. You're in favor of this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Uggan. Next is Lori Boss of Valhalla Adoptions. Make sure to unmute and you may begin with the testimony.
Hi, this is Lori. Tracy, our other director, is going to present our joint testimony on this. Thank you.
Okay, great. And before we proceed with Tracy, I apologize, forgive me, I forgot to recognize another one of our colleagues who has joined us this afternoon. Senator Jim Moylan, thank you for your attendance this afternoon. So now Tracy Anderson will provide testimony on behalf of Valhalla Adoptions. Tracy, Ms. Anderson, you may begin.
Thank you. Half-a-day senators, and also the staff and people that are working with CPS. And we're very glad that we can be here today. I'm here to represent Valhalla Adoptions, and I stand with Lori Boss and Kelly Larson to support this bill, bill number 206-36. We are pleased to see that guidelines would be set to govern the licensing of all persons involved in the planning, assistance, and placement of children on Guam, whether adoption agency or other entity. We see the wisdom and importance of utilizing the Administrative Adjudication Act and its process of checks and balances. Transparency in the creation of any rules and regulations provides an opportunity for input, the option of making important changes, and a sense of security in the final outcome. We support the request to make exceptions to the Administrative Adjudication Act provisions that are proposed on page 4, lines 20 through 25, to include a public hearing. This bill ensures consistency, promotes transparency, and provides funding to help make these rules readily accessible to the public. Page 1, line 1 through page 2, line 5 refers to the foster children of the island and notes the need for a minimum standard for all placements of any child by any unrelated person. This being the priority topic for the presentation of this bill, attention should also be drawn to the need for additional and related changes. Federal statute in the core child welfare system values safety, permanency, and the well-being of children. The permanency goal is intended to ensure that children and youth achieve a permanent family connection. The priority is with their birth families, but with adoptive families if safety issues cannot be resolved within a reasonable period of time. Apart from Bill 206, we would love to see a roundtable with all involved entities to explore a conversation about benchmarks, programs, support, government funding, training, and reunification steps for parents. Our desire is for us to all work together as a community to help solve this crisis. We thank Senator Mary Camacho Torres for her diligence in making the children of our island a priority, and thank all the senators involved in supporting this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the list is Bethany Taylor from Harvest House.
Hapaday. I'm Bethany Taylor, the Executive Director of Harvest House, and also a proud foster parent of 13 years, have 40 foster children in and out of our home, as well as an adoptive parent adopting the foster children out of our foster care system. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of this bill. I feel like my testimony is a little different than others, but I'm just gonna go ahead and read what I have. Harvest House is a nonprofit entity that provides support services to the foster community. We highly focus on recruiting, supporting, and retaining foster parents so that our foster children remain in a safe environment surrounded by nurture and care until they are reunited with their birth family, their biological family. We work closely with CPS to aid them in recruitment efforts and offer a broad range of support services to our foster community. As of right now in 2021, CPS is the only placement agency, yet they are understaffed and have a high workload. And because of that, there is a great need for them to have help in recruitment efforts and retention. Because of their support, sorry, I just lost my place. Because of that, Harvest House would like to come as a support entity, and other individuals also on this island want to come alongside and help CPS with help securing placements in need of foster care and adoptions. We have actually enjoyed working with them. They come to our facility and we work closely alongside them in recruiting and recognizing families that are interested in becoming foster parents. We do not license foster parents or adoption families, but we do all of our effort in social media, news outlets. Our own website has adoption or a foster care application. We also help families fill out applications and answer any questions. At Harvest House, we do an informational meeting on how to become a foster parent every month. And then we refer them and tell them how to turn in their application to Child Protective Services to be licensed as a foster family. From that point, once they are licensed by CPS, we come alongside in retaining them as a foster parent by offering any kind of support service that they would need as a foster parent and help the foster child. We also transfer that service to the biological family when there is when the child is reunited with their biological family. Even with the help of Harvest House, I believe CPS only has less than 50 licensed foster homes to place foster children in, and less than a dozen adoptive homes to choose from for placing children that are up for adoption. Of the 12 adoptive applicants, I believe all of them are wanting infants. Yet most of the time, infants in foster care do not go into a permanent placement until 18 months of inactivity by birth parents. That is why we do not have many infant adoptions on Guam, through CPS, because infants are placed in foster care. With the rise of the new foster children coming into the system, it is the government's responsibility to make sure foster children do not linger in the welfare system and remain in a temporary home and environment. Every child has the dignity and value and their worth as a human being and as a citizen of Guam to be placed in a permanent family. Foster care is temporary care. It is a temporary placement for very vulnerable children so they are safe while the biological family gets the help they need to get their children back. If for whatever reason a foster child is lingering in the system longer than 18 months, by law, that child needs to be included in a permanency plan. Although I do not know the statistics of how many children are in need of a permanent home today, I do know a handful of them by name. And for them, I speak out. I value their life and their need of a loving home to grow up in. As for Harvest House, this bill also puts checks and balances on us as a nonprofit entity to have rules and regulations in our efforts in helping and coming alongside CPS in your valiant efforts in getting homes for these children, whether they're foster care or adoptive homes. Every child matters to us, and it will take all of us private entities, nonprofits, individuals, senators alike, all of us here in the government agencies to come alongside each other and to find homes for children that are vulnerable and placed in a system and maybe placed too long in foster care system. So I'm here to speak out for them, and I am also in favor of bill number 206-36 LS, and I thank you, Senator Mary Torres, for allowing me to speak today. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I don't see anyone else on the list I have, but if anyone else is here to testify on this measure, please speak up now. Turn on your camera. If your camera is off and you're here to speak, wave your hand. If not, I believe that's everyone that's signed up to testify this afternoon. So if there's no one else here to provide any testimony, we'll go on to the question and comment section where I'll allow my colleagues the opportunity to ask any questions or make any comments, beginning with Senator Shelton. You're recognized.
Buenas, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to all of our partners who are on the line today, to DYA, to CPS, to Public Health, and to our non-governmental partners. Thank you very much, Valhalla Adoptions, and to Harvest House for your testimony today. I have no questions this afternoon, but I stand in support of this bill, and I appreciate everyone's time and effort to draft this legislation and to make Guam the safest place for our children, and to ensure that we have the proper rules and regulations in place for our most vulnerable children on island. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Senator Tidegui, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, I'll allow the speaker to go next. Are you sure, speaker? They usually call on you next, but out of respect for the office, so it's okay. Okay. Mr. Chair, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak on this legislation. It started back in June when we were fighting on the floor for almost 2 days of the importance of incorporating rules and regulations in the law. We had the opportunity to do so a few months ago, but unfortunately it didn't get through. And we are here today basically to talk within the 5 days, 2 bills, 2 measures that had come before this body and for the public to review. And I think we're all in agreement that the importance of having rules and regulations put in place is very important, but what's just surprising to me is that, it depends who's introducing the bill, which is very unfortunate, that we have 2 bills on the floor, but one's being one is saying that it has transparency while the other one doesn't. I think both bills has transparency. Just Terry, correct me if I'm wrong, and Mrs. Brennan, Director Brennan, that you have the authority and the ability to have any kind of public hearing when creating rules and regulations. Is that true?
That is
We
correct.
can work with the system to have a public hearing.
Okay,
That's
so
correct.
okay, so that's not an issue. I think transparency is first and foremost, especially when dealing with the most vulnerable. Director Brennan, if you have an opportunity, whether you support it or not, I appreciate any of also a testimony on Bill 173 that we heard earlier this week. Appreciate your testimony and your
Point of
comment
order,
and
Chair.
suggestion.
Mr.
Yeah.
Chair, point of order. I believe we are here to discuss Bill 206.
Mr. Chair, if I may please continue on. It all meshes together to try and make one good bill. If that's what our whole purpose is, I'm all for it, regardless whose bill it is. The point is that we came here because of a bill that should have had earlier on these rules and regulations, and today, 2 months, 3 months down the line, we could have had public health already having these public hearings on interim rules and regs. But we sit here today, and a lot of the stuff we discussed was discussed last week on BASA, the data information, all that. Bethany spoke eloquently, and she's such an inspiration to all of us to do the right thing. I heard that when someone mentioned, Terry from Ohala mentioned that a round table, I think it was in your testimony, putting a round table together. It was an idea. I saw Bethany shaking her head yes, and Terry shaking his head yes as well. And I think that's important to have, is a round table. And it looks like Director Brennan, would a round table to discuss this further be amenable to you as well? Director Brennan, yeah.
Thank you, Senator. I just want to say that I did have an opportunity to compare and contrast the bills as written. And I did have problems with Bill 179, and that basically it added that we were to, the plain reading of the bill suggested that we would license each adoption agency, like automatic certification. And so that I know that probably wasn't what was missed. So in Bill 206, I didn't have the problems with the language.
Okay, no problem. I appreciate your testimony and maybe including it as an amendment to Bill 179. But regardless of the point, I appreciate that comment that you made. But would you be amenable to a roundtable discussion as well to go further into, to bring people to the those involved to the table, like nonprofit organizations, public health, yourself as well, Director Brennan?
I've always been.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. In response, I have always been open to roundtables regarding CPS. We are still in a state of emergency, and we are all doing our best. And I have to credit the nonprofits for really stepping up, and for you, the senators, with really focusing on this emergency declaration and assisting us.
Okay, absolutely. And I'm finding too that these roundtables, even though they're not amongst a roundtable, but in Zoom, you've got more people showing up to Zoom meetings than you do if it was in a personal capacity. Director, again, the $1,000 that's in this bill, in the event that the money is not there, are you still able to fulfill the obligations of this legislation?
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, if the money is not there, I'm sure we can come up with the money to make sure that we pay for the ads, that we post with the mayor's offices and so forth. We see the value of all this. We see the value of both bills clearly. And although I've not talked to Lonnie about the bill 179-36 LS, that area that actually Lonnie just mentioned was also in my initial findings. And it's a little bit of a disconnect around that messaging. So when I had a chance to see 206-36. And I said, well, this, clearly allows us not having to automatically license everybody who's applied as had an applicant in to become an adoption agency. So I really like the transparency. As you realize, even a few months ago, when we had talked about on the floor about having a roundtable discussion and so forth, we're very much in favor of that. If we're not discussing things, then we're really not going anywhere. And Bethany, kudos to you too and the rest of the OHALA team who had mentioned about having an open discussion and talking about various topics. We are all about that. Sometimes we get so caught up, as Lonnie mentioned, we get so caught up in what is going on and trying to address the caliber of child abuse cases that are coming in, that we almost need to catch our breath. Like if you guys are willing to work on a Sunday around 9 o'clock at night, we would be able to at least carve out some time around that time. But it's whatever works. And I think this is such an incredible team that we could pull ourselves together and really come up with probably rules and regulations that other states would be looking to as their role model. Clearly, I think the energy and I think the passion is there.
Well, thank you, Terry, for that. And like many bills that have been brought forward for public hearings, and many times you provide testimony, you've always, like the testimony you provided in June 28th regarding Bill 108 and 109, you had recommendations on amendments to be made because clearly you thought that bill had a lot of flaws to it, and these recommendations were very admirable. I mean, not only you saw it, but some of the senators also saw the issues with it. So like any bill, you provide a testimony and your recommendations. Unfortunately, the testimony for 179 did not. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Director Brennan with her suggestions moving forward. So whatever comes to play, I'm just, very grateful that, the introduction in 179 prompt another bill to come out to do rules and regulations. The way I see it, all the fight and the push for this, and Terry, you're part of it, from your testimony on June 29th, the senator, the author of this bill, all that advocating and tears and sweat to push forward has created two pieces of legislation to finally address the rules and regulations that's needed, particularly for not only for our children, but for legitimate adoption agencies coming to Guam, opening up on Guam, and for people to have trust in these agencies. Because the last thing we want to do is to have someone come on this island, open an adoption agencies, and don't have the best interest of our children at heart, which causes all adoption agencies to have a bad name. And that's what we're here for. And that's what we've been advocating from day one. So for me, it's a win-win, having whether whose bill it gets in front or not, but we definitely have the will and definitely the heart to make sure the right thing this time is done. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titagui. Senator Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I certainly have to give Senator Tello some credit. She's far more gracious. I'm a bit concerned, Mr. Chair, and I'm concerned about how these issues are being treated. No objection. I'm very happy to hear that we're actually dealing with, which really is, Senator Tello mentioned, the focus of these bills. And now we're dealing with this other bill 48 hours later to deal with requiring licensure of adoption agencies, which is something several months ago or a couple months ago, we argued adamantly that the main sponsor refused to do on previous legislation that was passed authorizing this process and not having regulations in place. So I'm very pleased that we are moving forward with regulations. But I am going to state for the record, and I'm a bit concerned, it's unfortunate because I didn't realize, and it's not at all reflective of the departments that have come to testify or our private organizations that have come to testify from Harvest House or OHALA for these regulations, because I think collectively, Mr. Chair, we all recognize how critically important it is because our children are important. But this is unfortunately reflective of the actions of the legislature itself and how it assigns bills. Because of $1,000, we are having this bill heard with the Committee on General Government Operations that really has no oversight over the issues of public health or our children or adoption or rules or regulations. I didn't realize I needed to simply appropriate funds because I'm sure I could appropriate funds from my own budget as well. Also, for the record, the fact that the other bill that we just heard less than 48 hours ago was rerouted to the wrong committee. And when it finally got rerouted back, we heard it and we're hearing public officials, and my comments are directed towards the public officials that are here testifying today, because they could have very simply offered the minor amendment, really minor amendment with regards to holding a public hearing. There's nothing, as the speaker had mentioned Friday, about the ability of public health to hold a public hearing with regards to these interim regulations. The other factor here that was brought up is that the government now is being required under the previous bill to have an adoption agency licensed by public health. It doesn't interpret, I don't see the interpretation as meaning that any agency has to get approval from public health, but just the fact that any and every adoption agency that wants to perform these type of services with regards to children in our community would have to be licensed. And that is the main focus of what the whole objective was with regards to this issue, to ensure that the parties that are involved are obviously, practicing and doing things according to a certain standard that protects these children, protects the organizations that are involved, because now they know what the requirements are and what they're going to be held up to. That also protects them, so they know what standards are that they need to proceed. And then also, what standards are we expecting the government of Guam through public health as a regulatory agency to ensure that these adoption agencies are performing. But I'm disappointed. I have to say, Mr. Chair, I'm highly disappointed because I'm seeing politics rear its very ugly head. For a measly $1,000 for a few silver pieces, we are playing politics here at the Guam legislature with regards to our children. And I'm disappointed with the directors who just a few hours ago said, oh, we don't support this because we don't have transparency. I, who am very much an advocate of transparency. There's nothing to have prevented public health from holding a public hearing. There's nothing to prevent public health with all the millions of dollars that have been appropriated to public health for the management there to not prioritize being able to purchase the necessary ads to advertise or work within the community or announce this issue to the public. There's not an intent to hide this issue from anyone. If anything, we want more engagement, more awareness. I hope as a result of this controversy, Mr. Chair, that there is more attention put on these issues so that more people in our community are aware of the challenges that our children are going through. And also the challenges, a lot of our good people in this community are trying to help our children, the burdens that they have carried. And it's a very heavy burden because they need help to get greater awareness. But for the record, I'm going to state that I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed with our public officials because they're playing politics. Both language in both bills continue to say exempt from the provisions of the Administrative Adjudication Act. It's simply to allow an interim rule because it's necessary, because the legislature just not too long ago passed legislation that allowed adoption agencies to literally sit at the table and be directly engaged in the placement of these children. Directly engaged in that process with no regulations and no standards that in other jurisdictions is pretty much a standard. And I'm disappointed, but I'm going to thank everyone that has come forth and brought these issues to awareness. It's unfortunate because I don't even think this committee should be hearing this bill. Substantive wise, $1,000 does not make up for the bigger issues of wanting to ensure proper oversight of public health as having the key jurisdiction over addressing these issues of adoption in our community. And I'm going to state that again because it's unfortunate that this has happened. And again, it's not reflective of the parties that have come to testify, but definitely reflective of the politics being played in the legislature. And I think that's unfortunate. With that, Mr. Chair, I have no further comment with regards to this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. With reference to the referral process, again, that's through the Committee on Rules, so I can't speak to that. And as for hearing this afternoon, I'm just sitting in for the chair. So I don't know what went on in terms of the referral process. I can't speak to it. That question has to be asked of the Committee on Rules, and we'll leave it at that. So your comments are taken, and of course, they're part of the record now. Senator Moylan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for those who testified today. Mr. Chair, I'll keep my comments short. I'll just limit it to this bill and this bill only. But I do appreciate what I heard from all the testimony. It seems to be all in favor of moving this bill forward. I heard a lot about the transparency in this bill and how it's favorable for those who are involved in making the lives of our foster kids much better. So I just want to thank the testimonies provided by the directors and the nonprofit groups. I'm looking forward to hearing this bill move forward. I want to thank also Senator Torres for the introduction, and I appreciate the opportunity to be a co-sponsor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Speaker Terlaje, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to first raise a point of order in regards to the letter that we received from the Office of Finance and Budget. As you know, this bill was referred to the Office of Finance and Budget, or the Committee on Appropriations, because there is a $1,000 appropriation included in the bill, which primarily the bill calls for the promulgation of rules and regulations for adoption agencies, for the licensing of adoption agencies. Our rules require that the funding source that the Office of Finance and Budget determine, and the Committee on Appropriations determines that funding source is viable and sufficient to cover the appropriation in the bill. And the letter from OFB that we received on October 7, 2021, regards to bill number 206-36, makes no such finding. And I was hoping to see a finding of whether or not there is this funding is appropriate, whether there are funds sufficient to cover the $1,000 to be from the unexpended fund balance from the Office of Senator Mary Camacho Torres of the Guam Legislature to the program. And all they said is, Bill 206, if enacted, appropriates $1,000 from unexpended fund balance from the Office of Senator Mary Camacho Torres of the Guam Legislature to the program. It doesn't give us a conclusion as to whether the funding source is viable and sufficient. And the reason I would like a finding as to whether it's viable and sufficient is because if the funding source is determined to be sufficient, we have another rule, which is our standing rule, section 6.01D1, that allows for a re-referral to the principal committee with subject matter jurisdiction. And as was determined for a similar bill, Bill 179, by our Legislative Council, the operative section and primary purpose of the bill is the promulgation of rules and regulations to regulate adoption agencies by the Department of Public Health and Social Services as the agency with general authority over child welfare, and is most appropriate with the Committee on Health. As you know, Legislative Resolution 21-36 LS, adopted in February 2021, removed jurisdiction of CPS and welfare of foster children from the jurisdiction of another committee and placed it within the jurisdiction of the Committee on Health, Land, Justice, and Culture. So I would ask at this time, Mr. Chair, and put it on the record that I am requesting again, and I had submitted a letter to the chair in writing for a re-referral of the bill to the Committee on Health. In addition, I would just like to state that if this funding source is sufficient, $1,000, I hate to see a contravention of the spirit of our rules where a committee with primary jurisdiction over the subject matter of a bill is going to be bypassed for a mere $1,000 appropriation, because we could do that with any bill, Mr. Chair. And I think that's a precedent we don't want to really tie ourselves to. However, on the merits of the bill, I would like to add, I want to ask Public Health. So I'm glad that the directors, Brennan is here from DYA, and we have the Deputy Director here again from the Department of Public Health and Social Services. Thank you for being here, for your testimony. And I want to know, do you have interim rules right now for adoptions? For adoption agencies, for the licensing of adoption agencies?
We have rules, but they're not for the licensing of adoption agencies. As we spoke of on last Friday, the conversation around our partnership with Region 9, the state capacity team that we're currently working with, they're helping us go through community guidance with similar similarities of populations. And so we're using that as a tool. So no, in the interim, we are working on it.
All right. Are you aware of how many adoption agency transactions occur?
I do know from the last meeting on Friday, you said that you were going to inquire about that. I did state that the Department of Public Health and Social Services is aware of what we do. However, there is an array of private adoptions that take place that bypass the Department of Public Health altogether. This might be between a private family, their attorney, and a judge.
There's also a new laws that have been put in place that allow for others other than the Department of Public Health and Social Services to act, as used to be the exclusive realm of the Department of Public Health and Social Services. So I'm asking if you are aware of the actions under those laws. Are they reported to you? Are you licensing them? Are there any rules that you are using to review those actions or regulate those actions?
No, currently we're not. This whole process actually coming into play, becoming a law, and then moving forward with an initial vision of having March 1st as 2022 as being our deadline. And then all of a sudden this interim category has popped up. And then there's this level of expectation that we're supposed to already have it, bypassing a process that we have some excellent technical assistance teams to work with. It feels like almost there's a need to compromise it all and just say that we have it, but we're not. We are going to work with what we have for now. We're going to work through the process. You know, just as what was mentioned earlier, you know, we actually have two bills, you know, both of them moving forward with wanting to make sure that we have licenses, rules, and regulations in place. And some categories of concerns on Guam never even get to that point. So as far as I'm concerned, we're very blessed to have two sets of teams who are both interested in wanting to move this forward. And we're also blessed to have, you know, our federal partners who are willing to walk us through this process. But if you ask us today, do we have this right now? No. I can grant you there's a lot of other shortfalls that are out there regarding other very concerned areas, but we don't have this in place right now. And considering our deadline, my understanding initially was that it was going to be sometime in 2022. If we can get these out, the sooner the better. But I'm sure people don't want to compromise the process just to say that we have them. If somebody has agreed to have something in place that is very, very rough or very crude, but you know, we're asking these adoption agencies that are coming into the island, and right now we only have the one, but the one has really set the bar in the sense that we, the Department of Public Health and the community of Guam, need to get out of the mindset that POCSI and other types of cultural ways of addressing the placement of the children is not always going to be the play. And so we do want to make sure that we have in place solid rules and regulations. So to answer your questions, no, and for good reason.
All right. But you are aware that the current laws that were passed in July or made effective in July allow for other agencies to act without rules and regulations, right? That is the problem with that the both bills are trying to solve, that we have laws that have been enacted that really do not specify very clearly that the Department of Public Health and Social Services is going to be the one to license any adoptive agencies or placement of children, that you're not the sole entity to license that activity or to regulate that activity. And thus, both bills are trying to empower you as public health to regulate these activities right now, because the laws are effective right now. And without any rules and regulations, I question how transparent that process is. You know, we talk about transparency, but we have a process right now where I don't believe there's any regulation, because there is no regulation. It's not required. That's what these bills are trying to do. So I commend both bills for at least trying to ensure that it's crystal clear that these processes shall be regulated by the Department of Public Health, that public health shall be the one to determine the rules and regulations. Mm-hmm. And it's an empowering process. So it's very unfortunate to me that, I don't know, I feel like you seem to be willing to wait 6 months for even interim rules while processes continue to move. We're going to wait, according to this bill, 6 months or possibly 6 months, 180 days for interim rules. And that's where I'm questioning where the transparency is in that time. And the interim rules, and then you get a year. And I'm not objecting to as much time as you want for your permanent rules or your long-term rules, but it's this interim period that everyone's concerned about. And I think public health should be more concerned about, frankly, because that's why we're here. It's because we recognize that there is a huge gap. There's, so without any rules for 6 months, let's say, it's like, I don't know. I just think public health would not be able to put its finger on what the rules really are. So it's like jungle rules in the interim. I don't like that. I would like interim rules as soon as possible. They won't be perfect, of course. That's why it's interim. And you will have a process to make them better in the final rulemaking, right? And the different bills give you different time to come up with finals. The finals are not as, you can take as long as you want with that, but I feel like this huge gap that you have right now should be addressed. The other thing is that the laws, when they were passed since July, authorized or mandates that a child is placed in an adoptive home by a social service, meaning public health, or a Guam licensed adoption agency. They also allow that supervision of a child living in an adoptive home be under the guidance of social services or a Guam licensed adoption agency. A representative from an independent Guam licensed adoption agency may be a member of the adoption screening committee. And that's why these are examples of what laws we have in place right now, what is being allowed without any rules and regs for how these people are licensed. And these licenses are frankly just coming from the Department of Revenue and Taxation right now, not from the Department of Public Health. And that's why I'm trying to impress upon you the urgency of these interim rules.
Speaker, I can assure you.
If I could just finish, yeah. There's also, under the current mandates of law that have been changed since July, allows adoption agencies to place a child in a proposed adoptive home, where prior law allowed for only the Division of Social Services this authority. And so there may be some benefits to this. However, it's just a question of whether it's going to be regulated or it's not, and whether public health is going to be the one to lead this or it's not. And so the other issue with the bill is that this bill tells public health, by the way, Deputy Director, it very clearly says it will be exempt from the AAA. And I believe that was your objection to the other bill we discussed, was because there was an exception from the AAA process. This process that it seems public health supports now allows a public hearing by the legislature. So that $1,000 that you said you might come in handy at your public hearing and your notices might not actually be necessary for public health under this bill, because it's the legislature who's going to be holding the hearing. It's the legislature who will be determining the parties present. It will be the legislature in the end who is going to determine these interim rules and regulations, and not public health as was designed under the other bill. Not the experts in the field, not you who was working with Region 9 and And frankly, public health will have no control over that process at all. You can propose in the beginning, but then this process says, then you are exempt. The whole AAA process is exempt, meaning there will be, you know, and for time concerns, I am in favor of exempting certain aspects of the AAA, particularly the time constraints, right? Where you have to do certain things at different times. But like I said at the last hearing, there was nothing to prevent public health from having its own public hearing and controlling that process, having input from stakeholders, as was so important according to your testimony. And so I'm just, yeah, those are my concerns. It's like, so now, instead of empowering public health, we are more disempowering public health by pushing this process, an interim, almost an emergency regulating or emergency rulemaking authority, which has been granted to agencies when it's required by federal grants or other federal programs. We allow agencies to make emergency rules on their own. But this one is going to require that we, the legislature, are going to get involved again, you know, with this very, I think, critical public health matter. And oversight is fine, and having a, you know, input in the rules is fine, but we're talking about an urgent need to fill a gap right now where there are no rules. And I was just hoping public health is going to, you know, take more control of that process, take more, you're the one working with Region 9, we aren't, right? And if you want your rules to look more like the final rules that you're going to be coming up with, I would think that, you know, that you would want more control of that process.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do see Lori Boss has her hand up. Did you have something you'd like to comment on?
I did, thank you. I wanted to speak to Madam Terlaje's comments about adoption. I think it might be helpful for this group to know that we have not finalized an adoption on this island yet. We formed our agency because of the way we saw children being placed on this island. It's very disturbing to us. If you talk to anyone that's familiar with how children are placed, there are children passed off at the hospital to uncertified homes all the time, and everyone's aware of it. And those are some of the things that really surprised us. We did not come on this island to set up an agency. We were living here and we saw a need that we decided to fill. And that's our desire at Valhalla Adoptions. And we understand that all agencies may not abide by those, which is why we want guidelines. We've been asking DPHSS for guidelines since the very beginning of forming our agency. And without getting them, we've had to just go and find our own guidelines from best practices in different agencies in the US. I mean, I'm sure Terry knows this, but they're available online. You can get lots of suggestions for the interim to do something very quickly. You know, there are a lot of different rules and regulations that are published out there that might be able to be a basis before Region 9 gets back to you or whatever for long term. But that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Madam Speaker.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Lori. I also wanted to point out that we did receive, or I just found one, a BBMR fiscal note that says, services made available by the department to the community of Guam are either free of charge or made available at a discounted rate. Per DPHSS, the department will need to hire additional staff to handle the additional responsibilities of the proposed legislation. Staffing needs include 1 program coordinator, 3 at $45,000, and 1 social worker, 3 at $45,000. I don't get that. I mean, this is maybe this fiscal statement should have come with I don't know, but this is saying if you are going to prepare your rules and regulations, you're going to need these two persons. Is there going to be, do you see an impediment to coming up with rules and regulations if there is an urgent need for them? I'm going to ask it to public health and to the Director Brennan, because
Mr. Chair, can you clarify what that document is that we're reading on the fiscal note? Because I'm not aware that that is provided to the committee.
I just got it. It's a BBMR fiscal note, Bill 206. I guess it was uploaded.
Okay, thank you
Yeah.
for clarifying.
So Speaker, in regards to that, we had a request from BDMR asking us what the impact would be for Bill 206 6 in order to be able to have in place rules and regulations that was going to have in place the licensing of private adoption agencies. And initially we said no impact. It's simply going to be something that we're going to absorb through the bodies that we have now. And then the issue came up as to say, well, what if there are several adoption agencies that come into play? And looking at the monitoring, looking at the tracking, and looking at what interim, in addition to what final rules are in place, it was actually recommended that we go ahead and identify the need to have one social worker 3 and one other body for the purpose of manpowering what could actually be putting into place, really formalizing this adoption component. You know, seriously, Child Protective Services, BOSA, continuously runs on a shortfall, whether it's case management, investigation, whether it's crisis, whatever the case may be. And the idea is to be able to have the proper number of people in place in order to respond to the law, that cases, crises will be investigated right away or within a 72-hour, depending upon the severity of the abuse. So with that same energy, with that same effort, we're simply saying that if we're going to move forward with licensing adoption agencies, and apparently, obviously we are, and we're going to do it right, we want to make sure that we're not taking away the responsibility of other people who are doing investigation and crises work. And we're going to go ahead and plant a body or two that are there that can actually address and do more home visitations and do more monitoring and give more guidance and host more meetings and be more transparent. And I really don't think it is a negative thing to actually put enough manpower to do something right, especially while we're undergoing the planning process.
And I appreciate those concerns and I share them. And Deputy Director. And however, I don't think this bill with the $1,000 appropriation comes anywhere near any of that. In fact, I don't think the bill, since the public hearing is going to be held at the legislature, not at public health, really addresses what you've said. And the other thing is, I just want you to remember that, you know, when Department of Public Health came down for its budget, it admitted that it was $17 million short or compared to its budget last year. And it said it would even be shorted BOSA, but in the specific appropriations to CPS, to foster insurance, foster care health insurance, the specific appropriations to foster group homes, those were the same as last year, but the overall appropriation to public health was reduced. And when I asked the director at that time, and it's unfortunate that the director of the Department of Public Health is not here right now, because when I asked him very clearly at that hearing, if there is enough money, given this, what looked to us like a shortfall to run public health and these critical functions of public health, including BOSA, he said it was going to be taken care of with ARP funds. He was very clear about that. He would not increase his request to the legislature. And so I'm very sure that the legislature gave the Department of Public Health what the governor asked for, what the Department of Public Health asked for. I think a little more than that, in fact. But, you know, it is very unfortunate all the way around, don't you think? Yeah, that the Department of Public Health and Social Services you know, given what you are saying, is not going to be, you know, upfront and come up with those things during budget time. Anyways, I want to thank you for your support, and I support your work, and I want you to be successful in these rules that you are working with Region 9 on. But I just think, you know, we have to admit the urgency of this process, because I too have heard stories of babies in the last few months being transferred, you know, out of GMH into different custody. And I'm very concerned about that. And I want public health to be involved in this at every step of the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. And, you know, if you don't mind, I'd like to respond to that. And I totally agree. Public health sees the urgency of this. I've said it once, I've said it so many times that we do. And we're just trying to follow a process. If it means to go ahead and just have in place and true rules and regulations in order just to have them, but within reason, you know, will move forward and take more of that approach, and definitely having meetings more than what we are with the team that we have. And, you know, going back to the transparency and wanting to have a meeting, you know, we have one adoption agency on island. I'll be honest with you, between OHALA and public health, they really should be connected at the hip. They should be, you know? And so we were very clear that we could actually invite them into those Region 9 meetings and help us with that process. But even before that takes place, you know, again, I'm extending the invitation to OHALA to be able to say, let's come together. My number is 689-4482. If you don't have it, please write it down and give me a call right after this meeting. I hate the fact that people often say, well, we believe in what you do and we give you support, and yet sometimes the words are very cutting and very painful. I do know that several of the BOSS's staff are in on this call right now, and I really feel that it often belittles the amount of really hard work that they put into their daily lives in this process. There are adoptions that take place on Guam that have never included the Department of Public Health and Social Services. These are women who give birth, who say they have somebody in mind for their child. And it's through that process that excludes us here at Public Health. They've identified whoever the family is going to be. Often these are families they've known for a period of time, and this has been the traditional practice here on island. Now, here lately, it seems like there are other adoptions taking place at the level of the hospitals, in which case perhaps the mom doesn't know this family as well, and she really does not know exactly what the placement of their child is going to look like. And I agree, that's a very gray area. Right now, we are just trying to get our interim rules and regulations in order, but it is concerning and it does have a level of urgency.
Just sorry, Mr. Chair, if I could just ask one more question. That is, if the Department of Public Health and Social Services has received any ARP funds for BOSA?
You know, actually there was funding received, I think, through the Division of Public Welfare. There were some funds that were actually received. I don't know what the total amount is. I know that they had talked about accessing a vehicle, making sure that they have more vehicles to go out on the field. I think it actually only secured one, but there are other areas that they were able to, I think, finally get a couple of new computers for new staff that were onboarding. I know Lonnie and I are trying to work on, you got staff, but you need desks, you need computers, and they need to be able to have, you know, basic things like badges and everything else in order to do their work. And so that's been an onboarding process, but I would say, yes, there's some dollars that have come down.
All right, great. I would ask if you could relay to the director that we get a report of the ARP funds that you've received and how they've been allocated, please. Thank you. Thank you, Ms.
Great. Yeah,
I just wanted to clarify to this body that there are procedural safeguards that are currently in place for the adoptions that go through the court. Obviously, they require the background checks, they require the home studies, the comprehensive home studies that at this time, Child Protective Services does handle. Mayfe Muko is the HEP's supervisor, and she can tell you exactly how many adoptions that, and custody cases that we have done home studies for within the past 2 years. She can go back further, but I think that she's prepared with those numbers. So there are procedures in place. We do need a better working relationship, Speaker, with OHALA. We do know, we recognize that. You know, luckily there aren't that many safe haven babies that do come into to our knowledge. We have had several babies born that their mother was positive, and so we did have to take custody, and those numbers have been quite alarming. But they have gone to foster homes that have been approved by our bureau.
Yes, I think, thank you. I think only some of the cases that go through court are do they mandate a home study or a social study? Not all, yeah.
Not all, not in relative placement, but sometimes even in relative placement, the court will order that.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Brennan. I do see, I believe, is it Mrs. Anderson from OHALA Adoptions has her hand up. Please, you go ahead.
Thank you. So in reference to the rules and guidelines, interim or permanent, as we came and founded OHALA, we did so much of our own research and have been able to find a lot of guidelines and a lot of, there's a document done federally that shows every single guideline, and then they expect that each division, whoever's using these guidelines, would go through and choose the ones that are appropriate for their state, for their agency, whatever, because no one can follow every guideline. But this is given every guideline, and then you can choose it to make it your own. So I've had access to that this whole time, but we've been talked to and talking about stepping on toes or crossing boundaries that may be conflict of interest. So I feel like it's kind of being thrown out there now to have some communication and to have some talking about these rules and regulations. We'd be happy to share what we've learned. We don't have to step over those lines and be a part of making those rules and regulations, but sharing what we've learned may be helpful to everyone. The other thing that in bringing up these little ones that are being adopted straight from the hospital to whomever may come around, that what I heard a quote is, when a baby is born and a mom doesn't want to keep that baby, word goes around the hospital through nursing staff and someone ends up taking that baby home. That is disturbing to me, in that who decides who that is? Is money switching hands? Are people paying for babies? Are these going through private attorneys and then leaving island, private attorneys and never being followed up on? These are things that, as we're making, I say we, as these rules are being made for agencies, they can also be made across the board for standards, for attorneys, for any type of adoption. And when you talk about OHALA being the only adoption service on island, that's not even true, because there are two other organizations that I know of that offer to place for adoption. And I think that a lot of people are trying to do great things for the children. I'm not trying to make anyone get in trouble or say anything bad, because everyone has these children in their best interest. But I believe strongly that these rules and regulations can be put together to include all of these situations so that the best interest of the children is taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brennan, did you have something you wanted to add? I thought I saw you raise your hand, or?
No, I was just agreeing that, we're all here for the same purpose.
Mr. Uggan?
Yes, we all here for the same purpose, and that's just not lip service. But it's important to be able to have everybody come to the table and really get a grasp on all this. Comments like whomever comes around, meaning a child is going to be given to whomever comes around. Sometimes taking things you hear, I guess I'm just very cautious. Just like those comments about what you may hear, public health was very cautious even with OHALA. It was like, how did we all of a sudden have this adoption agency, and how were they able to move through the system as well as they have been? So I'm delighted that we share similar concerns. I think it's important that we get to know each other a lot better, that we go ahead and set up a meeting today, right after this or during this, and schedule something for this week. And anything as far as homework that you've done, as far as paperwork or things that you look at, those things are welcome. And we will sit at the table with the things that we have been able to put together as well. And let's just map this thing out, and let's get some guidelines that are in place that truly has the best interest of our children in mind. We've had enough of the terminology that actually has a level of lashback to it. We've heard enough that politics should never be involved in this process. But I know from state to state, when it comes to adoption, sometimes there is a level of that in place. Guam has always been an exceptional community. Let's make and let's continue to make the placement of children for adoption our priority. And if that means having our hands in the private adoptions at some level, then let's include that in our interim rules and regulations. But let's really put something together, because as Senator or Speaker Teresa Terlaje said, it really is unraveling that there could be, and in this case, 3 potential agencies or community-based organizations or what have you, that has the potential to be placing children, and they're really not on the radar. Let's come together. Let's all be transparent. Again, my number is 689-4482. Give me a call right after we hang up, and let's sit down and let's schedule some time. And I know, seriously, I would expect nothing less than having representative from Senator Mary Torres's team, representatives from Senator Teletadigui. I mean, let's all come together. We're all speaking the same language, and yet for some reason, we're not hearing each other. And so I think we really need to have more than a discussion. We need to put this into play.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. Is there anyone else here to provide any more testimony or make any more comments? If not, I will allow the primary sponsor to close. Senator Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to sincerely thank everybody for taking the time out of their busy schedules to testify in favor of this bill. I want to also bring us back to the whole legislative findings and intent, and why we went down this road with Bill 206-36, and why this bill garnered the support of 10 senators right off the bat. In section 1, LIHESLATURAN GUÅHAN finds that the Child Protective Services of the Department of Public Health and Social Services has expressed a growing demand for more foster homes and families on Guam. As of September 2021, the CPS indicated that there are 500 children in Guam's foster care system. This figure indicates a substantial rise when compared to the 270 children in the system in May of 2019. Given the high rate of children entering Guam's foster care system, LIHESLATURAN GUÅHAN finds it in the best interest of child welfare and safety that any individual or entity that places or assists in the placement of any unrelated minor is held to a minimum standard, whether in a foster home, a therapeutic foster home, or an adoptive home. LIHESLATURAN GUÅHAN further finds that the Department of Public Health and Social Services is currently imbued with the power to make regulations that implement and enforce the law administered to it under the Guam administrative laws and Guam administrative adjudication law. What we have emphasized is that, and it doesn't escape reality and the truth, that there are already adoption policies and procedures in Guam that any agency advocating for adoption in Guam must follow. And that is the truth. And adoption agencies are relatively new to Guam. So we're at that point in our history where we're dealing with policies and procedures for licensing. I do want to emphasize, though, that one point that has been brought up. One is that public health is empowered to oversee all things related to child protective services, and that power has never gone away. And in prior legislations that we've enacted, allowing the adoption agencies to come into the chain of command, for example, with the Newborn Infant Safe Haven Act, it's always public health that has the discretion to contact them and to allow them the custody of the child. So there's nothing in any of the bills enacted in laws that takes away from the power of public health. And I think what we've emphasized here is that it is in fact a greater collaboration, understanding that, as Terry, you so eloquently pointed out, it takes so many components to address the needs of a child in a community. And that is what I think we've all discussed here, is how we come together to address it, but have a minimum standard across the board in terms of rules and regulations. Whether it is agencies that are rumored to be out there or not, this is the time now to have true transparency, to understand who all the players are, what their roles are, and just ensure that public health is well aware, and that the standards of handling children and placing children are within the guidance and oversight of public health. And that is the beauty of it. I want to address one thing too, that, it really disturbs me that we have in these public hearings accusations about obvious and dirty politics, and and even the insinuation that somehow we are directing this to a committee by appropriating money. The precedent, and I just state for the record, the precedent for appropriating money for projects has been made by my office when I appropriated, for example, $75,000 out of my office funds for a feasibility study for a multi-purpose stadium that was signed into law. I also appropriated most recently $50,000 for a nurse study. So putting money behind my efforts and committing money out of my office account that is available, I wouldn't commit it if it weren't. That the precedent is there. So it's not dirty politics necessarily. It's just my way of ensuring that if I were to make a heavy recommendation to somebody to commit to something, that I either find the means within the general fund, or I commit my own personal funds if it's after the fact of the budget hearing or non-availability of funds. So I just want to make that point that, one, public health, no one wants to erode your powers. In fact, we want to ensure at the very least that the minimum standards that you have in place for the enforcement of child welfare in Guam are the minimum standards across the board to anybody that has to do with the fostering or the placement of child within our child welfare system. And I want to end, Mr. Chair, by thanking you for conducting this public hearing. And I also want to thank everybody for their testimony. And we will consider if there are any amendments needed at this point. I will review the testimony provided and review all other things. I also want to note that with regard to a fiscal note, this bill is specific to the promulgation of interim rules and regulations, and the funding that is identified here is specific to the promulgation of the rules and regulations, and nothing more at this point. We do, we can entertain, if there is a need by public health, additional funding sources if there is a need for something else. But at this point, what we've appropriated is sufficient. And I also wanted to just thank everyone. I think, Ohala, you brought a very good point that, you as a licensed agency are licensed on Guam, but for those that are concerned about being licensed without rules and regulations, where I've always emphasized is that we have within Guam statutes the procedures and guidelines with regard to adoption, and there's nothing that you as an agency can do to bypass that and endanger our children. And so that's the last point that I want to make, is where child endangerment through adoption agencies are the concern. That is where I've always emphasized that Guam statute, Title 19 and 26 GAR are very specific to those parameters, not only as it applies to what public health does, but also as it applies to the court system, and they're having the final say in finalizing and approving adoptions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Torres. The committee will receive testimony for the next few days for the acceptance of any additional information or public testimony on the agenda item discussed. You may submit testimonies to the mailroom of the Guam Legislature or through email at senatorjoesanagustin@gmail.com. Again, I want to thank everyone for attending this virtual public hearing and for providing feedback and suggestions. This public hearing is now adjourned. The time is 5 p.m. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can we get, Terry, can you send us your testimony? None of us seems, not even the committee chair has your testimony. Can you send that to us?
That's correct, Tella. I'll make sure I send it over, the one for both Friday as well as the one for today.
The one on Friday I received already. I don't know if you did an amendment to that testimony, but I asked if you could do an amendment to your testimony on what you think should be changed. But the one for today, I looked at Joe Masagan from Joe San Augustin's office, and they didn't receive your testimony. So just send it to all senators so that we have it for the record, if that's okay. Yeah.
That's perfectly fine. Thank you. And everybody have a good evening.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah.